Welcome to What Works. We're nonprofit leaders, share real stories about what makes impact possible, and their organizations thrive. Because success has patterns, and often the best kept secrets aren't found in the boardroom but in the field. I'm your host, Marla Moody. I'm a transformational leadership coach. And after 3 decades in the nonprofit sector, I'm deeply passionate about seeing nonprofits thrive, especially when the work is born from real human experience. Today's conversation centers on serving others through nonprofits while navigating personal journey of pain, faith, and hope. My guest, Burt Rosen, along with his wife Carolyn, founded Hold On to Hope. They co-founded the organization after their oldest son, Matthew, became homeless and went missing, an experience that transformed their lives and open their eyes to see the profound isolation families face when loved ones disappear. In this episode, it's going to be a little bit different than some. We're going to just explore how grief can become purpose and leadership can be shaped through loss, and what it truly means to hold on to hope while serving others. So get ready. Bert, can you show us what works? Welcome, Bert.
Thanks, Marla. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. I look forward to our conversation, and Lord willing, it'll be a blessing to those who are tuning in.
I certainly hope so. It's been just the short time I've had with you, Bert. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, so thank you.
Likewise,
Um,
and thank you.
Before we get started, I'd love to hear a little bit of uh, you have a lot of experience before Hold On to Hope from a professional standpoint. If you could just do a kind of a brief overview of some of the places you've worked, including how you got to Tennessee.
Sure, I'd be glad to. And let me just speak to one thing during your introduction. You mentioned that we founded Hold On to Hope after our son had gone missing. We actually founded it after he had been missing for about 23 years. And that was at the end of my time at Knox Area Rescue Ministries, where I was the CEO. But just stepping back a little bit, my professional background was actually in manufacturing. And then when I declined an offer to go to Lima, Peru to manage a plant there, I found myself unemployed. And I ended up hearing a speaker at my church who was an ex prisoner who was trying to get this halfway house for ex prisoners started. And I thought, well, I'm not doing anything right now while I'm looking for work. Let me see if I can help out. I would end up staying there for 10 years. During that 10 years, I'm the new guy, I'm the midnight shift, and later became the director of that program. After 10 years, I left to join Prison Fellowship Ministries, which was the international organization that Chuck Colson had founded after his Watergate experience under then President Nixon. That took us from Miami, Florida, to Louisville, Kentucky, to Washington, D.C., and then to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we spent the last 12 of our 17 years with the organization. During that time, I was an area director, I was a regional vice president, and I was the chief of staff for programs and human resource development. And it was towards the tail end of that 17 years that I began to get this little bit of a rumbling in my gut that told me change was about to occur, but I didn't know what it was back then. Well, as it would turn out, that change led to me responding to a search firm who was looking for a new CEO for Knox Area Rescue Ministries in Knoxville, Tennessee. I would spend the next 20 years there before leaving about 3 years ago in what was a planned exit so that we could make way for the next CEO and future leadership.
Thank you for that. When we talked, you mentioned that a lot of times the exit's not planned. And tell me what's significant about having a planned exit.
Well, I will go back to the book that really became my guide during all of that. The book was Transition Plan, and it was written by Bob Russell, who had just finished his stint as the senior pastor at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, one of the 5 largest churches in America. And in his book, he began talking about his transition, but also in the book, he mentioned He made this comment that profoundly affected me. He said, if God has given you the gift of energy and vitality, why not start planning your transition now instead of leaving your board in a lurch and having to find your successor with very little amount of notice? And so I took that to heart. I had a board member walk me through that journey together. And in the book, Bob suggested that in his case, he said, ask yourself, what are the three, four, five most important things you can do for your organization? Focus on those things. And so taking that to heart, I began to see firsthand the experience of having a transition plan that is a plan. You can be methodical about it. The board is engaged in it. All of the stakeholders know what's going on, and at the appropriate time, you can announce it. And I would liken it to a smooth baton handoff in track and field, where in the passing lane, you have one runner with his hand outstretched finishing his race, while the person waiting for the baton has now picked up the pace and they have their hand stretched behind them. And there's nothing more beautiful in track and field than to see that smooth handoff. And so we knew from that and from other transitions that we had looked at, and we got a lot of coaching and a lot of advice, how to have a smooth transition that is God honoring and honors the people that are involved in the organization. I think if we had not done that, we may have gotten through it okay, but not like we would have having a plan.
Mm,
Everybody knew what was going on, and that made a big difference, especially at the senior leadership level.
yeah. And I love that you knew it, you were purposeful about it, and yet you still got outside consulting, coaching, which shows a humility in and of itself to know it needs to be done right and might need some of those outside perspectives. So how honoring it is to do it in such a purposeful way.
Yes, no, thank you. And I think I would just add to that that being the CEO was a gift. And I treated our organization as this tender package that, if done well, would pass on to future generations and the organization would outlive me. And the last thing I wanted to see happen was for the organization to be tied to Burt Rosen, and that when Burt Rosen's not there anymore, the organization takes a tumble. I wanted them to go well beyond anywhere that I could have ever gone with it.
You know, it's interesting. I've handed over positions that I've worked my, heart, soul, blood, tears, and knowing it was time to pass it on. It's at least for me, it's rough. And you want to see it the legacy continue and you sometimes even see your fingerprints all over it, but there is something about handing it over that I don't know how it was for you, but for me, it took humility. It took the desire to see something bigger than myself continue.
Yes, I would agree, and I did not share that side of it, but there was a grieving process. Even though I knew it was coming, everybody knew the date. We had planned it down to when we were gonna make our internal announcements to everybody, external announcements, all of those things that you would want to do when you have a well, executed plan. And yet, as we got closer, "Am I doing the right thing?
Yes.
Should I really be doing this? Is it I have so much energy and so much more to contribute. Do I really wanna do this?" And then after it was all over, I felt a sense of relief because I had been wondering about jumping off the high dive, and I finally jumped. But then when it was over, there was this sense of emptiness, and suddenly my life felt like I was going from a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit on the turnpike down into a school zone where I have to travel at 15 miles an hour. And it was quite a bit of an adjustment, not so much because of what's gonna be next, but right now, I just feel this tremendous sense of loss. I've handed off my baby to some like watching my daughter get married a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I could talk about that because that is close to my heart too of really handing over something that I built from scratch and then ending that and it's like yeah, not having that authority and not having that schedule and that if I say something, people do it kind of thing. So, but to take that leap off the high board and survive and have something more to do afterwards. I think that's a good reminder for people who it's time to make that leap is there's still life and service after handing that over.
Yes, and, I would say the experience was a little bit different for Carolyn. Carolyn was very now she wasn't paid to be there. Um, she was as active as any employee inside the organization, and we talked about me retiring from that role. And in Transition Plan, Bob Russell talks a little bit about the impact that it had on his wife when
Yeah.
he retired. And so Carol and I talked about what is this going to be like for you? And you alluded to our missing son, and perhaps in the broadcast, we'll get to that after a bit. But for her, me stepping away from Carm was tantamount to abandoning any hope of ever finding our son again. She had created this link. And so for her, when I stepped away, made it less likely that we would ever find Matthew.
That has a depth that I wouldn't even have expected, but yeah, because I mean, the firstborn child, almost that stepping down is the giving up of hope of finding him, and how courageous of her to still allow you to do it.
Yes, yes.
So,
Well,
Carolyn.
that's an interesting comment, her allowing me to do it. Um, I there's a point in time when you know it's time to move,
Hmm.
and we would have had to work through it because we had gotten to that point, and I had gotten to that point where I knew now that my thoughts were beginning to be preoccupied with the future. I had the handful of things that I wanted to see accomplished before I moved away from the organization. But now my thoughts were beginning to drift, and to have stayed on any longer would have been to have satisfied a different need rather than having my heart in it as the CEO. And I never lost the heart for the ministry and what we did, but I knew my season was now coming to an end, and prolong it for solely that reason, or because Carolyn wanted me to stay with it. We both know that that would not have worked, meaning she and I. We both know that in the long run, that not would not have worked for us.
So I do definitely want to get back to the past, but I don't want to miss this opportunity because I've seen it too often. When I was an operations leader for North Africa, Middle East, and Central Asia, when we when we transitioned leadership from one person to the next in a country that I won't mention, but in North Africa, the wife of the former leader really had a hard time with the new
Mm.
leader, and to the point where they flew me in for a week to really spend time with her, spend time with the staff, allowing that accepting of the new leader. They thought they had done the transition well. Obviously, there was maybe some different work, and I've seen it over and over again. That was the most personal to me because of my role at the time and how I just really sat and loved on her for a week. What would you tell someone who's a CEO or a leader, a president that knows it's time to leave and just maybe for some reason can't make that step? What would you like to share with them?
I think I would say push your feelings aside, put any ego that you have aside, and think about what is best for the organization that you care deeply about.
Yeah.
Trust God that He has something for you in the future. But chances are, if you're now at that point, your time to leave has already passed. You should have been thinking about this a couple of years ago. Now, you can't go back and do that, obviously. But if that is what's happening in your world, start your plan today. It's never too late to start, but don't wait until you have to wake up one day and do as others have done, tell their board after all these years, it's time for me to move on. I feel led to do that when you've been feeling led for quite a while.
Mhm.
Invite them in, make it a process that is for your good and the good of the organization.
Thank you. Thank you for that. If you don't mind, I'd love to transition a little bit back because you mentioned that um, your current foundation was, came from 23 years of not knowing where your son was. It's been
Correct.
25 now. Those early years, Bert, first of all, just thank you for just trusting us with your story.
Sure.
But as you reflect on those early days, what helped you just honestly keep going before there was clarity or purpose? How was that for you?
Well, it was a progression of things. So early on, when this first happened, we always told ourselves, this is just temporary. Like a young kid who runs away from home and he'll be back soon, whether it's
Hmm.
a day or 2 days or whatever. And so in the early part of that, we came to this realization that maybe he's not coming back. And what are we going to do? And so we did what was very logical for us. We prayed, we sought comfort from those around us, and we went to our local church. I'm a big fan of and supporter of the local church. In this particular case, our church didn't know what to do. So when we went and spoke with our pastor, the answer we got was, "Don't worry, this is all gonna work out okay. Just wait and see, and Matthew will be home in no time." He tried to offer some of us encouragement, and here's a few things to read and consider these scriptures. And the reality, Marla, was that we just needed someone to hear our cry.
Mhm.
Our heart was aching, and we didn't know what to do, and we took long walks, and we did everything that we could just to try and hold ourselves together. But at the same time, we were recognizing that our pain was deeper than perhaps we were first acknowledging, and that we did not know where to go. But scripture has always been a comfort to us. The writings of many of whom I won't take the time to go through now, but we found a lot of solace in. But a couple of things. Uh, One is that Carolyn began to get this notion that after 7 years, because now time has passed a little bit. I'm CEO of CARM after Matthew had been gone for a little over a year, kind of working out my own salvation with fear and trembling. And in some way, there was this sense for both of us. You may not be able to do anything about your son right now, especially if you don't know if he's dead or alive. But there's 6,000 plus people coming through CARM's doors every single year. You can do something for them. And so in some ways, living it out in a way that was helping others made a difference. Carolyn began to think that in 7 years, Matthew was going to return because if we look at what happened to Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, he went insane. 7 years, God gave him back his sanity. And so Carolyn believed that Matthew was gonna show up at our doorstep at the 7-year mark,
Wow.
and I thought, "I don't believe that." My faith was not strong enough to believe that, but I didn't wanna rain on her parade. Let me ride your coattails of faith, because nothing would be more wonderful than to see that happen. And as 7 years got closer, she would step out the front door, look over to the side where we have a little porch swing there to see if Matthew maybe came home in the middle of the night and was just there on the porch swing, or that he was gonna knock on the door, "Hey, mom, I'm home." Well, 7 years came and
Mm.
went, and now going back to the pastor, he said, "Don't worry." Well, days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years, and now at the 7-year mark, it was really shattering for Carolyn that that didn't happen because she had become so convinced that that's what was going to transpire, and it didn't. Well, then we moved on to what's the next milestone and the next milestone. But in all of this, I think perhaps what helped us both through it was neither one of us were abashed in telling the story
Mm.
of our son who disappeared and how that was affecting us and how it helped us understand what it might be like for others who have a missing loved one. So we began to just turn, and I don't think it was an intentional, let's turn our pain into something useful. I think it was an organic process that just began to happen. What we began to see was that the story, the transparency began to resonate with people, but that we weren't unlike so many others, but so many others perhaps were reluctant to talk about it. So you get invited to come share what's going on in a Sunday school class. And then you get the
Yeah.
call afterwards. Could we come have a cup of coffee? Could we get together for a meal? Because everyone has their story to tell. We realized that as painful as this was for us, we were not all that unique.
Yeah.
So it became, God, help us to take what's happening in our life and use it so that we can be a blessing and a comfort to the others. How can we encourage the homeless people that we served? If you've got a loved one out there, let them know you're alive. So we kind of turned that so everything that was happening was becoming a positive for other people while
Yeah.
we were still trying to wrestle through it on our own. It just progressed from there. And it continued to happen kind of organically. And this is long before Hold On to Hope had ever occurred to us. But you have that sense, God, somehow you're using what has happened in our life and is currently happening to benefit others. All the while, we never knew whether Matthew was dead or alive. Carolyn would often refer to that as mourning the living.
Yeah.
And so our prayer was, God, can we just get closure? If he's dead, let us know he's dead. As painful as that would be, we could at least then begin to grieve and have closure there. And if he's not, could you please do something that would connect us back to him? That did, the latter eventually did happen. That's a whole nother story altogether. But one of the ways that we continued to get through it, holding on to the anchor of hope that only God can give, and then using what was going in our lives to do as best we could to be of service to others.
There's a few things I wanna just underline. One, you just mentioned having a son missing is heartbreaking. Having a son missing and not knowing if they're dead or alive is a whole new level of ambiguity, of unsettledness, and I'm gonna hold that for a second because I have a follow-up question with that. But I don't want the moment to pass without highlighting the fact that the transparency you had, instead of holding it in shame, which is so often true, the ability to say, "This is our story." It didn't minimize it, yet it did put it in a place where it was of service and didn't just degrade you by needing to keep secret. I've been playing with this philosophy, this thought of transparency helps get rid of anxiety because when there's transparency, there's at least the platform of talking and it doesn't have to be shame in the midst of it. That story, that truth, what you and Carolyn both chose to live out in the midst of pain that we'll never understand, right? Unless you've been in that situation. And even if you have, it's going to be different. And the expectation of looking outside every day. And yet you allowed it to be a tool as well, not to minimize your pain, but to at least leverage it for the good of mankind.
Yes, there was one moment, Marla, when I first became the CEO at Carm. It took me back. There used to be an old Gillette commercial on TV where they were showing a man shaving, and
Mhm.
as he did, his face kept morphing into someone else's face, and they were just showing all of the different faces that Gillette was a good product for. Well, when I first began at Carm, the face of every person who walked through our door, the neediest of the needy, the poorest of the poor, every face morphed into the face of Matthew. And I thought, I can't do this. God,
Mhm.
why would you have me in a place where I've got to live with the pain of this every single day? I remember going to the board and saying, I think I've made a mistake. I think you've made a mistake. And I'm sorry for all of the trouble that I've put you through. I just don't think I can do this. This is a bad decision. Well, the board was very receptive to what I was saying, but they weren't gonna let me out of it so easy. So I really am thankful for a board who recognized something that I couldn't see at the moment, because I think if I had had my way, I wouldn't have continued in the work. But by continuing in the work, the number of people whose lives we were able to make a difference in, whether it was through us directly or through the staff that we had that was reaching out to others, the personal ministry at CARM, as well as what was beginning to unfold at churches, I don't think would have happened if I had given in to what my inclination was there. And if God had said, okay, mistake, Bert, I agree with you. Go on back and do what you did before. But it was very painful and it was very soul searching. It wasn't until I began walking the streets saying, God, what have you done? Why do you have me here? It was as if he said, he was taking a passage out of scripture. He said, I want you to see with my eyes. I want you to hear with my ears. And I want you to feel with my heart the pain and the anguish that is surrounding you. I'm going to use what you are going through now to make a difference in those lives there. I think that
Yeah.
was my Rocky Balboa moment. Yo, Adrian, come on, we can do this.
I think real brief, could you just mention what kind of ministry CARM is? I think that's an important note.
Yes, thank you. CARM is actually an acronym for Knox Area Rescue Ministries. We were a combination homeless shelter for those who needed a place to stay overnight, a meal for anyone in Knoxville who needed one. We had a shelter for women who were fleeing domestic violence, and we had a residential recovery program for those who were trying to get over their addiction. So all of that was wrapped up under one umbrella. We served approximately 350,000 meals per year. We were home to between 5 and 600 people every single night, depending on what the weather was doing. And we were there to share the good news of Christ with those who just needed to hear his message. Whether they ever responded or not, that was not up to us. Ours was to sow the seed.
Yeah. So I just wanna, uh, put that as a highlight that you chose to step into, a CEO position of a homeless center and so many other things with a son that you had not seen, with a son that was either passed or homeless.
Correct.
So seeing his face on every person that stepped through your door makes a lot of sense. And the support of your board sounds like was paramount for keeping you going.
Absolutely.
So how did especially those years of that personal agony, how has that shaped your leadership?
I think that it helped me be empathetic. It helped me be a better listener. There was a tagline from an old radio broadcast years ago. Dr. Clyde Naramore was a Christian psychologist out of Pasadena, California. What he used to say is every person is worth understanding. I think what helped so much was that if Carolyn and I, who, if you'll pardon the expression, reasonably decent white middle class family with 4 kids, if our son could drop out of college, end up homeless, and disappear, then it can happen to anyone. And so we saw those who were coming through our doors not as people who were homeless, but people who had been on a journey and they just needed someone to come alongside them. I think I'm drifting from the question that you asked there, but our experience with Matthew helped us to see others. And the desire then was to make Carm a place where if Matthew were to show up, this is a place I'd feel good about him being.
Mm,
We want to enhance people's dignity. We didn't want them to stay where they were, but we didn't want coming to a homeless shelter to be this rundown, dilapidated looking place that you say, gosh, being on the street is better than being here. We wanted to treat them as royally as we possibly could. And so when I want to treat other women the way I would want someone to treat my wife, when I treat other people, male, female, others, the way I would want someone to treat my son or my daughters in all of that, it shaped it. And so when you take a look at your programs and all the other things that are going on inside the organization, you want them to be the best they can be, not because of whom you serve, meaning our God, but also for the people that are coming through the doors.
Hmm.
If you were to have ever shown up in a shelter during those years on the street, I'd want him to be at a place that would not leave him invisible, would somehow recognize his needs, find ways to respond to those needs, and put him on a path that allows him to live his best life. And that became a driver for us inside the walls of Carmen.
That is motivational to think through from that eyes of if I was a parent, how would I want them to be showing up and where they are? The word hope is such an interesting word because it takes almost faith. It's almost faith in the future. It can feel abstract when someone is hurting though. What does holding on to hope actually look like during those hardest days?
You know, it's a great question, Marla. Um, I don't know what it looks like.
Hmm.
I can think about how hope behaves, and hope acknowledges the difficulty and realizes that um, I'm trying to hold on to something stronger than I am. Hope, like the word love, has so many different connotations. I love mashed potatoes. I love my wife's spaghetti. Well, I hope it doesn't rain today. There's an author that talks about three levels of hope. There's the casual hope. I hope it doesn't rain today. I hope my golf game doesn't get rained out. Or I hope Marla's surgery goes okay. Then he talks about this deep level of hope that if it's not satisfied, it can destroy your life. So holding on to hope for us became realizing that we had to hold on to something that would withstand the test of time, even if we never saw Matthew again.
Wow.
It's not all peaches and cream. It's not every day, oh, isn't this wonderful? We're just holding on to hope. No, there were days when it felt like we were holding onto a rope, and holding onto the rope is what's giving us hope. But days where we just felt like we were sliding down the rope, losing our grip on it. And then to hold on to hope is regaining that grip on the rope, realizing that God can give us a strength beyond what we think we're capable of doing. I think that's the only way I can talk about what it looks like is being able to hold on to that rope a little bit longer, not losing your grip.
Wow.
And I don't know if I did that very well.
In the midst of it, the fact that you're still here and have a marriage and and able to continue to serve, there's never perfect, right?
Right.
So, especially when leaders are in such painful spaces, you were in personally, and then you were serving a community that had a lot of pain in it. What did you learn about caring for yourself and your own heart while you continued to show up for others?
Yeah, that's a great question also. I love the questions you're asking. It took me a little while, but I learned to be in touch with myself. And I could recognize that sometimes I was very good at compartmentalizing, sometimes I was not. I knew instinctively that if I go through with this meeting today, or if I go through with a meeting with this individual or a group meeting or a team meeting, whatever, to know what my mood is coming into it, to know how I'm feeling coming into it, and to remind myself of what's going on in me.
Mhm.
So push that aside, delay it or whatever, so that you can be what you need to be for your team. None of us is without pain and difficulty in our life, but to know thyself, so to speak. I know when I should and when I shouldn't, when I can and when I can't. but you also draw certain lines, and this is a slight deviation from the question, or my answer is, but Carolyn is a brittle diabetic. She has something that, in layman's terms, it's hypoglycemic neuropathy, which means her blood sugar is dropping, but she doesn't get all the symptoms. And the next thing you know, she's passing out or something else is happening. We got to a point where she could call at work, talk to my assistant, Kathy, and if Kathy said, Bert, Carolyn's on the phone, something's wrong, I would drop whatever I was doing and I'd head out the door. And life continued on without me. But I
Mhm.
knew where I needed to be. And but also now this is where transparency came back in because in at the senior leadership team level, for me, being most effective as a team meant being able to talk about what's going on when you're in the huddle. So if I had kept that all bottled up, there would be no explanation for, boy, Bert seems a little edgy today. To be able to say to your team, guys, I'm having a hard day today.
Mhm.
It's Matthew's birthday, or there's something else going on. I'm having a hard time today. Would allow someone else to say, hey, you know what? Why don't you let me facilitate today and to be ready to relinquish. I think one of the things that just served me well, perhaps some would say, you were a little too transparent, but I never thought that I was too transparent. So in doing that, it allowed me as a leader, if I needed to just close my door in my office for a little bit, create a little bit of space, I didn't leave anybody wondering what mysterious thing is going on with Bird. And so I would say to any leader, transparency is so critical for developing the level of deep relationships and trust that you absolutely have to have at the senior level in order for the organization to move forward. And so in my particular case, I was never ashamed to tell people about Matthew and what was going on, or to say, hey, today's Matthew's birthday. I'm just having a rough day today. But you do have to press on. As a leader, you must press on. You can't just continually be ducking what you need to be doing because your life has some trauma in it, whatever the trauma is. Do what you need to do, learn how to get your head together, but also know when it's time to step aside. I'm not one who is fond of it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So if I could read what was going on in myself, I could take the time to prepare. And if it was going to be especially difficult, I could share with the rest of the team what was going on in me that day. And you know what it did, Marla? It freed others up to do the same. They knew that I would trust them with my feelings and what was going on in my life, and they learned to do the same. And I think that's what made us great as a team.
And, what I notice is there's a difference between transparency and that emotional IQ to go, "It's a rough day for me." If I seem edgy, if I seem distant, and yet not using that as an excuse. I didn't hear anything that had to do with I'm a victim, or it's the I don't need to ask forgiveness later kind of idea. Hard balance, and I'm sure it was never fully balanced, but you're not a victim. You don't have excuse to just go on a bender or whatever.
Right.
But you also have the ability to know yourself well enough to say, I might look off today,
Yeah.
and the team to get it and even support you in that. So really great leadership view right there. I do want to be conscious of our time.
Yeah.
I have so many more thoughts and questions, but where just talk a little bit more about hold on to hope and what is it that you're hoping to accomplish or to continue to move towards in 2026?
Yeah. So Hold On to Hope began and still is just me and Carolyn. And what we're finding, we have fielded calls from as far as California and as far east as Pennsylvania. And what we know is that if we use a national statistic, there's a NamUs database which has 600,000 names on that list of missing people. if some reasonable percentage of them have a loved one who wonders where they are, sometimes they just need someone to help them hold on to hope. So what we're doing now, there's one couple that we worked with for over 2 years who now says, "We're ready to take calls from others
Wow.
and help them walk it through." Over time, we hope to expand this, not just to families who have, someone who might be homeless, but also, to those people. If you think about the stories that we read with someone with Alzheimer's who has disappeared, if we think about human trafficking and what it must be like for those parents who have had a child or even another adult loved one go missing, and they don't know if they're ever going to see that person or not. You can hear it when you see TV interviews. We're just hoping. The word hope keeps showing up and showing up. A person can become weary. So, what we're doing is wanting to spread what we're doing far enough so that anybody, anywhere, who finds themselves in a situation where they have a missing loved one and they're just finding it hard to hold on, call Hold On to Hope. We will do whatever. We'll give you a shoulder to cry on. We'll just listen. If someone is inclined to want to pray, we will do that as well. We don't do searches. We will provide someone resources where they can go hire someone or find freebies to do their own searches. We're just there to hold their hands, um, through Christmas, through
Mhm.
Hanukkah, through New Year's, through birthdays, through those times in a family's life where family get togethers or other milestones. Having a missing loved one is so acute. I just want someone to talk to. That's what we do.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that, and thank you for passing it forward. Could be that maybe we work together. I do a lot of art therapy for the ability to regulate, to process things like that. So it could be interesting to serve people who are still holding on to hope and doing that.
Yes, parenthetically, Marla, the family that we worked with in York, Pennsylvania, they actually gave us as a Christmas gift an art piece that someone else has done that was their vision or view of Matthew either walking to or away from something that, um, what a difference it makes. So you not only have those who receive the art, but those who are actually drawing or whatever it is that they're doing that you might help them through. That's just so valuable.
That's beautiful. Well, I will leave information about that in the show notes and we can chat about it as well. Also, after we finish this, for the podcast itself, I have some prompts, some questions for people listening if they want to receive those just to process some of the things we've heard here to make it your own. And we will also leave information, Bert, that you can give us in the show notes so that anybody that's listening who needs it, whether it's a missing person in their lives or some other aspect that this could touch and help them with. So
Yeah, that would be wonderful. That would be wonderful.
wonderful.
That's what we're here for.
That's great. Well, Bert and Carolyn, even though we didn't get to see you, thank you for starting Hold On to Hope and loving on people and just continuing making it through and holding on to your own faith when it would have been easy to just call it quits.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for that. And thanks for giving me the opportunity today to share a little bit about the journey we've been on. And hopefully it'll be a blessing and an encouragement to someone who hears it.
I'm sure it will be. So thank you so much, Bert.
Thank you, Marla.